The state of California is pretty big, believe it or not, and while most people focus on places like the Bay Area or Hollywood, it's easy to forget that the state is more than just Los Angeles and San Francisco. So, naturally, there needs to be a way to connect the rest of the state in a way that isn't just endless highways. Enter railways. California's rail trackage is almost as plentiful as its need to build road infrastructure while insisting that it's the most rail-friendly state. And while most of its trackage is either abandoned or only served by freight rail, there is one line down the Central Valley that does host an Amtrak route. One that just recently decided it's time to have a complete identity crisis and by all means not serve food on board. I'm of course referring to Goldrunner. Howdy and hello everyone, and welcome to 5008 Explains, a show where I, a person not named 5008, so please, for the love of God, stop calling me that, explains things in the rail industry briefly enough for you to not click off when I start explaining why 2106 is underrated. In today's episode, I'll be going over one of the least Amtrak-managed, Amtrak state-supported routes, the ridership runt of Californian Amtrak corridor routes, Goldrunner. Our story begins on March 20th, 1927 with Southern Pacific's San Joaquin Flyer train. This train ran between Los Angeles and the Oakland Pier, with it essentially being a Central Valley version of the iconic Coast Daylight, which ran along the coastal route. This train would later drop the Flyer and simply be named the San Joaquin in 1928. Alongside the San Joaquin, Santa Fe also wanted to compete with their own duo of trains running from San Diego and Los Angeles to San Francisco. The issue with this was that Southern Pacific owned the route through Newhall Pass, meaning Santa Fe had to go all the way around to Barstow before going up through the Central Valley, so naturally this service didn't put up much of a fight against SP's offerings. But after failing once, Santa Fe stepped up to the plate once again, and so on July 1st of 1938, Santa Fe debuted the Golden Gate, which ran between Oakland and Bakersfield. This train managed to beat SP's travel times and match them in pricing. Combine this with some nice sleek new rolling stock, and now SP had a competitor on their hands. Alongside this, on June 11th of 1939, ATSF inaugurated the Valley Flyer train. This train ran a similar route to the modern-day Goldrunner route and ran the exact same route as the Golden Gate, with its service being simply a single daily round trip. This train was pretty much a temporary thing for events happening around that time, so the train would later be discontinued shortly thereafter. This entire time, SP was kinda just sitting minding its own business while Santa Fe worked on bettering its offerings. Now that Santa Fe actually could put up a fight, SP decided to freshen up the San Joaquin, renaming it to the San Joaquin Daylight on July 4th of 1941. This train would utilize similar coaches and branding to the Coast Daylight, utilizing that nice orange, yellow, and black color scheme. Come 1946, the San Joaquin Daylight would get an expansion to Sacramento, with the train splitting off from the existing route at Lathrop. By the 1960s, when passenger rail in America took a massive plunge, both the San Joaquin Daylight and the Golden Gate were at the end of their rope. First of all was the Golden Gate on April 11th of 1965, followed by the Daylight on April 30th of 1971. But of course, that's not where the story of this route ends, as only a few days after the Daylight was discontinued, Amtrak would be established to take up all of the failing passenger routes. Would they actually be improving them? No, but just them simply running was enough for the US government to tell the public, yeah, I'll probably make a profit in a few years. Despite what you'd think, neither the Daylight or the Golden Gate were reinstated at first. The coastal route had service, but in terms of the Central Valley, there was a whole lot of nothing going on there passenger-wise. Thankfully though, thanks to Congressman Bernice F. Sisk, who really looked like he should have been ordering hits in 1920 Chicago, Amtrak started looking into bringing service back to the Central Valley. And so on March 5th of 1974, the first San Joaquin's train ran between Oakland and Bakersfield, with bus connections between Bakersfield and Los Angeles. Now many of you are probably wondering why, even before the 1950s, were railroads choosing a bus connection over just running trains? Well, at first it was because no one in their right mind wants to detour to Barstow, but then it became a matter of the massive mountain pass responsible for making SoCal look like a really good Minecraft seed. Tehachapi Pass is the only way to get to the Central Valley from SoCal, and given how geographically mean that pass is, the trackage is naturally built like a loose spaghetti noodle, and is one of the most congested single-track areas in the entire goddamn world. Thanks to this, Tehachapi is essentially a massive titanium wall to passenger service, because double tracking it would cost a lot of money that the multi-billion-dollar freight companies don't want to spend. And to this day, there is still no passenger service between Los Angeles and Bakersfield, and it doesn't look like there will be for a long while. But past the fact that it couldn't get to Los Angeles directly, the Central Valley finally had passenger rail service again. And then Amtrak tried to drop it in 1979. Yeah, because for some unknown reason, the government decided, I know how we'll fix our passenger rail service, starve it. Amtrak had to cut a bunch of service in 1979, with the San Joaquins potentially being one of them. Thankfully, Caltrans, California's DOT, stepped in with a pretty good subsidy to keep the train operating. This also came alongside the request to add a second round trip and extend the train to Los Angeles through the route of the San Joaquin Daylight. Amtrak managed the first one, but because Southern Pacific heavily opposed the idea of running even just a single round trip through Tehachapi, Amtrak couldn't manage the second. As time went on, the service gradually expanded, and by the mid-90s, the San Joaquins was running at an okay 4 round trips per day. In 1995, the service was officially given its own rolling stock to be shared with the new Capital service in NorCal and the San Diegan service in SoCal. This was a fleet of 9, later 15, F-59 PHIs and a large fleet of Morrison-Knudsen bi-level coaches, featuring a true low point in headlight design. After this, unlike its sister services, which were renamed to Capital Quarter and Pacific Surfliner, the San Joaquins didn't undergo any branding changes, but it did expand its route up to Sacramento on May 16th of 1999, with a nice and low single round trip daily between Bakersfield and Sacramento. This was thankfully expanded to 2 round trips alongside an infill station in Lodi in 2002. From here, the San Joaquins basically did a whole lot of nothing for the next decade, something the vast majority of Amtrak routes saw during this time, where Amtrak didn't have a lot of money. Okay, I know that's the usual, but when I say Amtrak was broke, I mean they couldn't even afford to own their own equipment levels of broke. This era of tumbleweeds was broken in 2002 when Governor Jerry Brown signed Assembly Bill 1779, which created the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, or the SJJPA. The SJJPA is a group of various transit authorities that would help manage the San Joaquins. At this point, both Pacific Surfliner and Capital Quarter had their own managers, that being LASAN and the CCJPA, with LASAN coming in the late 80s and the CCJPA coming in the early 2000s. So this was a long time coming for the San Joaquins. The level of control for these boards varies, but for the SJJPA, Amtrak was pretty much just there to provide maintenance, staff, and some funding. Past that, the San Joaquins was a state-controlled route. From here, the service would expand and receive a new fleet of Siemens SC-44 Chargers in 2017, which were shared with Capital Quarter. This service genuinely could not have any rolling stock to itself. This Charger fleet was combined with the existing fleet of 15 F-59 PHIs. Well, dwindling fleet of F-59 PHIs, allowing for a rather smooth transition. Very different from what happened with Surfliner, which is a prime example of why you shouldn't lease your own equipment from a manufacturer. From here, San Joaquins continued onwards, granted with it taking a bit of a hit thanks to the pandemic, but service would gradually begin to increase after that, with ridership following suit. Funny how this was the one time the service got its own rolling stock. I have an entire video dedicated to the Ventures on the sister channel Whitestone's Rail, but essentially, the Ventures were and still are a pretty messy situation for this service. But the main kicker was the fact that since Caltrans and IDOT had a nasty breakup or something, Caltrans decided to just not put cafe cars on the Venture train sets. You may think that description is dumb, but it really is about the most accurate way I can describe to you just how stupid this whole situation was. Now, when most people dog on new rolling stock and say it's scaring away passengers, those claims are usually way overblown and the ridership isn't affected much. In the case of the San Joaquins, this lack of a cafe car seems to actually be driving passengers away, as while Capital Quarter and Pacific Surfliner have been seeing tons of growth, Goldrunner has been seeing negative growth as of late. The SJJPA has been insisting that it's been trying to supplement this issue, but their urgency on this issue has been lackluster since the Ventures entered service in late 2022, it's mid-2026, and the only food you can get on Goldrunner is still some Chex Mix and a soda at best. Past the Venture debacle in 2024, there was a rumor circulating that BNSF had banned SC-44s off their Central Valley trackage because of chargers frequently breaking down when the temperature climbed past around 105 degrees. This led to a very ironic situation, as now San Joaquins had to use F-59s with paint schemes that fit Capital Quarter's bi-levels, and Capital Quarter had to use chargers that, well, didn't really fit with much, but fit more with the Ventures than they did with the California cars. This was later fixed by summer of 2025, allowing for almost full Siemens sets to run once more. Now at this point, one would assume the SJJPA is done with all these changes to the service. The Ventures were arriving, the chargers were working well enough, and as long as they got the food issue sorted, people wouldn't need to worry about starving on board. But no, that's not what happened, as in March of 2025, leaks started popping up that the SJJPA was gearing up to rename the service. A name that has technically been around since the late 1920s, gone because the SJJPA wants to run some buses. But hopefully this name would be good, right? A name that actually made horrifically tacky. I don't even have a joke for this, what the hell? I don't think I have to explain to you why Goldrunner is objectively not a good name, but now that it's almost been a year since the rename, I understand it slightly a bit more than I initially did when I first heard it. You see, the SJJPA's plan for the service going forward was to expand it, but not only the rail part of it, rather the bus service attached to it. So naturally, a name centered around rail wouldn't really work, since bus-only trips would become slightly more common. Doesn't excuse how god-awful the name is, but I can at least understand why it isn't rail-based now. Regardless, on November 3rd of 2025, San Joaquins, a name present since 1928, was officially swapped out for Goldrunner, with a ceremony showcasing some of the new branding, including a bus and a venture coach. Since then, the service has been operating as such. The San Joaquins branding is slowly but surely disappearing, and food service on board is progressing slowly. The service mainly runs with Venture consists, with a few bi-level consists still running when Venture sets are unavailable. In terms of the future, the service appears to be skewing even farther from Amtrak, as now not even maintenance in the main Oakland facility is done by Amtrak, rather Herzog. However, the service does have plans of expansion. However, they aren't quite as grand as one would hope, and any expansion to LA is still being blocked by Tehachapi. With all that being said, I do still believe Goldrunner has the ability to become the main connector for California. Granted, they appear to be having a bit of a hard time right now, but especially given how California High-Speed Rail will be in desperate need of a connecting service when the iOS is completed at some point, it does have the opportunity to be a good service. Oh, and while you're over there improving your service offerings, maybe, just maybe, fix the Venture scheme.